No one expected it, not from the Galactic Empire, not from the ones who arrived in peace with shining ships and promises of knowledge, not from the ones who shared technology that cured disease and built towers that touched the sky. They came speaking of unity, of progress, of a great galactic community where Earth would finally find its place among the stars, and humanity welcomed them with open arms because after centuries of war and struggle, this felt like the beginning of something greater. The leaders smiled, the scientists studied, and the people dreamed of what would come next. Faster travel, cleaner air, limitless food, no poverty, no war, no need to fear the unknown, when the unknown had already come and introduced itself with open hands, and Sorth joined them. It started with diplomatic missions, cultural exchanges, peaceful training exercises in orbit, and slow integration into the galactic economy. Human ambassadors were selected not from military backgrounds but from scholars, thinkers, artists, diplomats, women and men, who represented the diversity and spirit of Earth. Among them were the women, 47 of them, handpicked for their brilliance, compassion and ability to communicate across cultures and species. They were teachers, peacekeepers, negotiators, scientists, explorers. They were the symbol of what Earth could become in this new order, not conquerors but collaborators. And then, without warning, they were gone. It began with a simple news alert, a transmission intercepted by a deep space listening station that mentioned the detainment of human personnel on an Empire-controlled moon. No names, no details, just coordinates. Panic spread, but the governments said nothing. They needed time, they needed clarity. But the silence only grew louder. Families demanded answers, the public erupted in protests across cities on every continent, and the media could no longer hold back. The names were leaked, photos of the women smiling, boarding shuttles, hugging loved ones before departure, mothers, daughters, friends gone without a trace. The Empire offered no explanation, only a single line in a cold message. The detained are under investigation for breach of interstellar security protocol. Earth was stunned. A breach of what? The women had no weapons, no access to restricted data. They were peace envoys, and still the Empire refused to release them or provide details or even acknowledge their locations. The Council of Earth met in secret. Nations that once saw each other as rivals now sat side by side asking the same question: what do we do when gods become tyrants? They sent messages, then ambassadors, then pleas. But nothing came back, not even a lie. The people did not wait. They marched in the billions. They lit candles in the streets and painted the names of the women on walls and buildings. They filled the skies with drones, showing faces of the missing. They declared, "We will not forget." And as the Empire watched the quiet rage of a planet begin to rise, they did not understand what they had done, because to them humanity was new, soft, emotional. But to humanity, this was the oldest story in the world. You took our people, and now we are coming for them. The Empire believed itself untouchable. Its reach spanned galaxies, its fleets outnumbered the stars, its archives held the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations, and its arrogance had grown thicker than its armor. So, when Earth demanded the return of its women, the Empire responded with silence, and when Earth asked again with diplomacy and patience, they responded with threats. Masked in protocol, they said things like, "This is beyond your jurisdiction, and you are not authorized to access classified proceedings, and the matter is closed to the Empire." Earth was still a child, barely crawling among the stars. Loud, energetic, full of potential, but ultimately harmless. And so they dismissed the outrage, they ignored the protests, the tears, the shaking voices of human leaders who warned them that this was not sustainable, that this would not be forgotten. They ignored the banners held high in the streets of Earth's cities, with the faces of the missing women printed in bold. They ignored the small fires burning in the hearts of billions. They ignored the quiet, and that was their mistake, because humanity does not forget. Humanity remembers every name, every face, every promise broken, and every hand taken. And so while the Empire scoffed and celebrated its control, Earth changed for the first time in centuries. There were no borders, there were no rivalries, there were no arguments over language or wealth or history. There was only unity, a unity born not of hope, but of fury. Military leaders from every nation sat at the same table and spoke the same language and wore the same crest, a black circle with 47 stars. Scientists abandoned research into colonization, and focused solely on war. Engineers built not cities but weapons, not stations but armories. Hackers wrote code not to steal but to destroy. And far beneath the surface, in hidden bunkers, old enemies shook hands and signed papers that would change everything. Because they knew this was not about diplomacy, it was not about balance, it was about family, it was about the women they had sent to represent them who now sat alone in cells, if they were even still alive. And so they prepared ships, once used for exploration, were refitted with stealth drives and missile bays. Satellites disguised as observatories became armed sentinels. Training centers overflowed with volunteers. Men and women who had never held a weapon before now learned to fight. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The decision was made not with anger but with certainty. If the Empire would not release them, then Earth would take them back. No matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter the fire it would take to burn through the walls of the most powerful regime in the galaxy. And somewhere deep in the black where stars whispered and war slept, the Empire received one final message, not a demand, not a plea, not a declaration. Just 3 words spoken in the voice of every soul on Earth: we are coming. The Empire did not respond. They received the message, they heard the words, they saw the silence that followed, and still they did nothing. No new orders were issued, no security alerts were raised, no reinforcements were dispatched to the border. They believed it was a bluff. They believed humanity did not have the will or the strength to challenge them. They believed wrong, because Earth was no longer the same planet they had welcomed into the Council of Stars. It was something new now, something forged in grief and sharpened by purpose, and as the Empire turned its gaze elsewhere, Earth moved quietly at first. Its ships vanished from their regular routes, disappearing into dark corridors between systems. Its colonies stopped broadcasting routine updates and instead began transmitting encrypted signals to the Outer Rim. Even the AI networks on Earth shifted behavior, processing millions of possibilities. Each second calculating scenarios where victory was improbable and preparing anyway. And then it happened. A blackout across Sector 7Z3. Empire outposts went dark at the exact same moment. No distress signals, no signs of battle, just silence. By the time they sent scouts to investigate, all that remained were craters burned into the surfaces of dead moons and one human-made beacon floating in the void. It flashed a single phrase in every known language: give them back. Panic began to ripple through the lower ranks of the Empire. They had underestimated humanity before, but now the evidence was clear. This was not rebellion, this was not resistance, this was war, and it was only beginning. Within days, Empire patrols were attacked in transit, ambushed by cloaked ships that struck fast and disappeared into space. Outposts were hacked and forced to self-destruct. Supply lines collapsed, entire convoys redirected into dead zones where nothing returned. And across neutral worlds, footage began to spread: leaked videos of the captured human women shackled inside dimly lit facilities guarded by machines and beings with no faces. Their conditions were inhumane, their cries muffled, their names spoken softly by alien guards as if they were already forgotten. The galaxy watched, and suddenly Earth was not alone. Small planets long oppressed by the Empire began to whisper. Resistant cells reignited old networks once thought dead, and the Empire, the mighty, unshakable Empire, felt something new. Uncertainty. Their leaders met in vast chambers made of crystal and light, debating the threat, calculating losses, dismissing concerns. Still they refused to release the prisoners. Still they believed they could contain it, but Earth was already inside their walls. Earth was already beneath their skin, and while they spoke in circles, another outpost fell, and then another, and then an entire communication grid collapsed over a dozen systems, and the words appeared again, across every terminal and broadcast: give them back. But by then it was too late, because the war they thought they could avoid was already here. The war began without a declaration, without fanfare, without ceremony. It began in silence, like a blade sliding into flesh, unnoticed, until the bleeding could no longer be stopped. The first true blow came when an Empire dreadnought exploded in orbit, over a mining planet. No survivors, no warning, no sign of who had done it, but everyone knew humanity had learned. They had studied the Empire inside and out, gathered data, tracked movements, analyzed language and behavior and weapon systems until they understood how the Empire thought, how they breathed, how they moved, how they responded to threats, and then they turned that knowledge into strategy. The old governments of Earth had long believed in defense, in diplomacy, in peace. Now they believed in retribution. The unified Earth Command was born not from politics but from necessity. It operated from a mobile command ship the size of a small moon called the Resolution. No flags, no borders, just one mission: bring them home. And if the galaxy had to burn to make that happen, then so be it. The Resolution launched strikes in 9 systems at once. Some called it impossible. But Earth had been planning for this since the day the women vanished. Within hours, supply depots exploded, orbital platforms went offline, and communication hubs collapsed. Empire forces scrambled to respond, but everywhere they turned, they found human tactics they could not predict. Guerrilla warfare in space traps laid inside asteroid fields, drones hidden in plasma storms, viruses that turned their own ships against them. For every one human ship destroyed, 3 Empire vessels followed, and still humanity pressed forward. The faces of the missing women appeared on every screen in every battle. Each ship bore their names, each soldier wore their images on their sleeves like armor. They were not just rescuing prisoners, they were reclaiming what had been stolen on Earth. People watched in silence. There were no cheers, only determination. Families of the lost stood together in unity, holding hands, lighting candles, sending messages to the stars. We see you, we love you, hold on. The galaxy began to shift. Species once silenced by fear now whispered behind closed doors. If Earth could stand, if Earth could strike, then maybe they could. To the Empire responded with brutality. They scorched the surfaces of rebellious planets, sent assassins to kill human commanders. BROADCAST. False footage of the women claiming they were guilty, but it only fueled the fire, because every lie made the truth louder, and every act of cruelty made the mission clearer. The women were not symbols. They were not martyrs. They were not forgotten. They were alive, and Earth would not stop until every last one of them was home. The Resolution set its course for the inner system, straight toward the heart of the Empire. And when asked by a council drone to clarify its intention, the ship responded with a single message, broadcast on every channel across the stars: "We are not afraid." They called it a suicide mission. The Empire had never been challenged in its core systems, never been touched so deep inside its own territory. Their defenses were legendary, their fleets unmatched, their central command surrounded by layers of protection, built over centuries of dominance and fear. And yet the Resolution moved forward without hesitation. It did not travel alone. From behind asteroid belts, from hidden moons, from silent dark stations, came the fleets of Earth, fast, silent, deadly. They traveled in formations designed to confuse scanners, wrapped in signal distortions, and cloaked by the interference of collapsing stars. Human scientists had found ways to turn the natural chaos of the galaxy into camouflage, and with every passing hour they closed in inside the Empire capital. The High Council argued. Some still believed Earth would retreat, others wanted to make an example of them by executing the prisoners live across the network. But fear had begun to take root, even if they would not admit it, because Earth had done what no other species had ever done. They had made the Empire bleed, and they had not stopped. On the outer rim, rebel activity surged as species long silenced by force saw a new path. Whispers turned to shouts, and shouts turned to action, and for the first time the Empire had to split its forces. It was no longer a single war, it was many, and the center could not hold still. The women remained locked away somewhere in a facility so deep, so hidden, that even the most loyal commanders were denied access. They were restrained, monitored, studied, not because they were dangerous, but because they were human. Because they had not broken, not one of them had begged, not one of them had betrayed their mission, not one of them had given the Empire the satisfaction of surrender. Even in isolation they stood together in silence and in strength. They knew Earth would come, they knew their people had not forgotten. One of them had carved a message into the wall of her cell with a shard of broken alloy. It read, "We are still here," and across the stars a technician aboard the Resolution found that message buried in an intercepted maintenance log. He showed it to the captain, who showed it to the crew. And that night, as the ship crossed the final threshold of neutral space, the message appeared on every screen: "We are still here." It became the battle cry of a world. Across ships, across bunkers, across every war zone, the words echoed like thunder. Not in anger but in promise. The Resolution reached the outskirts of the inner Empire, and stopped, not to hesitate but to send a final transmission. To the council, to the military, to the people. It was not a demand, it was a fact. "You have one chance. Return them, or we will take everything." And when no answer came, the sky lit up and the real war began. The first strike was silent, no alarms, no warning, just the sudden disappearance of an entire orbital defense ring that had floated above the Empire's core world for generations. It simply vanished, disintegrated from within by a virus uploaded through a deep space relay disguised as debris. It was a message humanity had not come to negotiate, they had come to win. Seconds later the Resolution opened fire. Its weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, forged from theories and desperation. Built in secret labs buried beneath oceans and ice, massive railguns launched projectiles faster than light, punching holes through capital ships before the enemy even realized they were under attack. Swarm drones, black as night, poured out of launch bays, moving like insects dancing through fire, raining destruction in patterns too complex for any system to track. And through it all came the fleets, tens of thousands of human ships from every continent, every nation, every orbital colony, moving with precision, guided by a unified command, forged through necessity. The Empire responded with fury. They unleashed their full strength, from battleships to planet killers, from gravity weapons to temporal displacers. Their sky turned red with counterfire, and their systems screamed with alert. But for every human ship destroyed, two more pushed forward, not because they were stronger, but because they refused to fall back, because they had names carved into their armor, because they had faces printed on their helmets, because they were fighting for someone, not something on the ground. The Empire's military stations began to collapse. Not from bombardment, from within. Human special forces infiltrated them days earlier, disguised as civilians, as refugees, as mercenaries. Now they activated, planting charges, unlocking cells, turning defenses inward, and walking corridors they were never meant to see. In one such base, deep beneath the crust of a command moon, a door opened that had not opened in months. A long corridor, cold, dim, silent, and at the end of it, 47 cells flickered to life. Inside them the women lifted their heads. They did not know who had come, but they heard it, the sound of boots, the sound of gunfire, the sound of home. One of them smiled. She had never doubted. Outside, in orbit, above that same moon, the Resolution took heavy fire. Its hull cracked in places, systems faltered, engines burned, and still it held position, still it fired, still it stood between the Empire and the world below, because that was its mission: to protect the retrieval teams, to hold the line, to bring them home. And across every screen in the galaxy, the footage played, grainy, shaky, raw, a human soldier stepping through smoke into a cell, reaching out a hand and saying one word, "Commander." The woman rose slowly, took his hand, and whispered, "How long?" And he answered, "Not long enough to forget. Not long enough to quit. Come on, we are going home." The rescue spread like wildfire across encrypted networks, across civilian feeds, across the deepest corners of galactic space. Came the images of the women being led out of the cells by human soldiers wrapped in blankets, holding on to each other. With eyes full of exhaustion and fire, the people of Earth wept, not because the war was over, but because the promise had been kept. They were still alive, and they were coming home. But the Empire did not surrender. Pride does not break easily, and the High Council would not admit defeat, not even as their walls fell, not even as their systems failed. They ordered one final strike, a full annihilation command: destroy the Resolution, destroy the rescue ships, destroy everything. But by then the Empire was already breaking from within. Dozens of species under their control had already risen up. Factories had stopped working, soldiers had laid down arms, ships had changed course mid-flight, and entire fleets defected to the human side, because the galaxy had watched Earth, had seen them unite without condition, had seen them march not for conquest, but for family. And for the first time in history, the galaxy believed in humanity. Inside the burning heart of the Empire, the Resolution refused to retreat. Its crew knew the orders. They were to protect the extraction, no matter what, even if the ship fell, even if they never returned. So they stayed, systems on fire, weapons overheating, oxygen dropping by the minute, and still they fought. The last evac shuttle rose from the surface, carrying the 47 women, now joined by the soldiers who had saved them, some injured, some silent, all alive. They looked out the window and saw the battle still raging, saw the Resolution still holding. One of them asked if they could speak to the ship. The pilot nodded and opened the channel. "This is Commander Ray. We are safe. We are aboard. You did it. Now come home." The message was heard across the fleet, and for the first time since the war began, the Resolution changed direction. It turned away from the enemy and began to move, slow burning, but alive. The remaining Empire forces tried to intercept, but were cut down by rebel fleets who now flew with Earth markings painted over their hulls. A new alliance formed in real time, born in blood and defiance, and the galaxy watched as the greatest warship Earth had ever built limped out of enemy space with the women it had come to save, not as a symbol, but as proof that unity is stronger than fear, that no voice is ever too small, that a promise made by a world once divided could shake the stars. And back on Earth, when the Resolution finally arrived in orbit, Broken, scarred, glowing with heat, but still flying, the world stood still. And as the women stepped onto solid ground for the first time in a year, they did not speak, they simply looked at the sky and knew humanity had changed forever. The return was not quiet. It could not be. Every screen on Earth, every station in orbit, every outpost across the stars showed the same image. The women stepping off the shuttle, surrounded by soldiers, saluted by world leaders, embraced by loved ones. Their faces tired, their bodies bruised, but their eyes bright with the fire that had never gone out. They were not victims, they were survivors. And the world that had fought to bring them home stood in silence, not cheering, not chanting, just breathing, together for the first time in peace. But the war was not finished. The empire still existed, though fractured and burning. Its high council fled, its armies scattered, its citizens now asking questions they had never dared to ask. How had it come to this? How had one small world shattered the myth of invincibility that had lasted for thousands of years? And more importantly, what came next? Earth did not celebrate in the way empires do. There were no statues, no parades, no conquests. There were only names, names of the fallen carved into stone, names of those who never returned, and names of those who had endured. Commander Ray stood before the United Earth Assembly not with a speech prepared by politicians but with a single message spoken from the heart of someone who had lived through the darkness. She said, "We did not fight to rule, we fought to return. We did not burn to conquer, we burned to reach each other, and now we must become more than what we were. We must become what they thought we never could, a voice not of power but of protection, a force not of dominance but of defiance against cruelty." And so, Earth extended a hand to the rebel planets, to the broken colonies, to the scattered fleets of alien species who had once called the Empire their master. "We are not your rulers, we are your allies. Let us build something new." And one by one they came. A former Empire commander who refused to fire on civilians and now led a refugee convoy of 5,000, a scientist who had sabotaged her own labs to keep weapons from being built, a child born in a prison world who had never seen a sky until Earth forces opened the gates. They came not because Earth was strong, but because Earth had shown what strength could mean: justice, loyalty, sacrifice, hope. The resolution was never fully repaired. Instead, it was placed in orbit above Earth, as a monument not to war but to unity. And inside it, a single chamber was preserved exactly as it was during the final battle. Burnt walls, cracked screens, a seat still holding the name of its last captain. Because history was no longer written in victory, it was written in memory, and the galaxy watched not in fear but in wonder. Because the world they once mocked, the people they once dismissed, had done what no one believed possible. They had changed everything. Peace did not come quickly. The galaxy was still wounded, still bleeding from centuries of control and silence and war. There were systems on the edge of collapse, planets without food or water, people who had never lived a day without fear. But something had changed, something real, something permanent. It was not just that the Empire had fallen, it was that Earth had risen. Not to replace the old throne but to tear it down and plant something new in the ashes. A coalition began to form, slowly, carefully, born not from politics but from shared survival. Worlds that had once only spoken in trade now shared knowledge. Old enemies now sat side by side, building instead of destroying. And in the center of it all stood humanity, not perfect, not pure, but present, willing to listen, willing to help, willing to protect. The 47 women returned to their lives, but they were not the same. Some became teachers, some became leaders, some chose quiet corners of distant worlds where they could simply exist without cameras or questions, but none of them were forgotten. Their names were etched into the stars. One of them, Dr. Leon, opened the first interspecies academy on a station built from the wreckage of former Empire warships. Another captain, Maras, took command of a peacekeeping fleet dedicated to stopping conflict before it could begin. And Commander Ray, she refused every political offer, every request to speak at grand events. Instead, she traveled to every world that had suffered too, every family that had lost someone, to every place where the war had left a scar. She spoke to the broken and told them they were not alone. She carried with her a small piece of metal, a fragment of the wall where she had carved the words, "We are still here." And when people saw it, they remembered that they too had survived. The Resolution remained in orbit, never to fly again, its engines cold, its halls silent except for one. A memorial chamber filled with light. Visitors came from every corner of the galaxy to walk its halls, to touch its walls, to read the names. No matter what language they spoke, they understood. what it meant, that war is not always fought for power. Sometimes it is fought for love. Sometimes it is fought for one voice that should never have been silenced, and sometimes it is fought for whom the empire never rose again. Its fragments faded into memory, its symbols replaced by new ones, symbols of unity, of defiance, of something greater than fear. And long after the war ended, long after the battles were studied and the books were written, there remained a single truth: the day they arrested the women was the day the galaxy changed. Because in that moment, they showed the universe what Earth would do for its people, and in return the universe learned what it meant to be human.